Welcome to Connecticut Politics Live with Joe Aguirre and Michelle Botello. Michelle is away tonight, and so joining me is my main man, Jimmy J. You can also catch us Thursday nights, 8 o'clock for Divided We Stand. Very excited. Got a great show for you. We're going to give you all of the latest headlines on Connecticut. Going to present you with the facts, and we'll banter a little bit and kind of give you an idea of the right and left talking points that you're going to hear related to these things. And then at 5:30, very excited to talk to a good friend of mine at this point, Jamie Stevenson, a really fine Connecticut Republican woman who ran against Jim Himes in the 4th Congressional District. And I was shocked at how poorly Jamie performed. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of why that happened. And we're also going to talk to her about Donald Trump and his announcement in running for president and what that's going to look like here in Connecticut. Jimmy, as you know, obviously very divisive character. And I think he played a big role in Connecticut being as blue as it ended up in this election.
I would actually agree with that, as much as I don't want to, but I would have to agree with it. He is a very polarizing figure, right? He's like the Dallas Cowboys. I equate, you either love him or you hate him. There is no in between. I don't think anybody in this country is on the fence right now about Donald Trump, right? I don't think anybody.
No,
right?
No, so, yeah, there's probably nobody that's got to, I don't know, I really thought much about it.
The jury's still out on this guy,
yeah.
Right? So, I mean, even if you like him, you like him, right? You're in that camp. Nothing, he can walk on water, right? He can do no wrong. But if you hate him, my God, you would think this guy is the devil himself. Yeah, and that's how polarizing it is, and it'll affect everything down ticket. I'm just saying.
Oh, it definitely did. Look, he I think is purposefully divisive too, and I don't think that helps. And I think people are sort of onto that idea. And again, we've talked about this, you and I, extensively. People don't like extremist candidates, left or right. And when you're sort of the head of that movement, it really becomes difficult to not affect everybody else. And again, Connecticut somehow got even bluer than it was before. Bob Stefanowski had no connection through this election with Donald Trump, and yet performed worse than he did 4 years ago by about 8 percentage points. And so, again, I've been saying, and one of the reasons why I like Jamie Stevenson so much is she is what we have always referred to as a Connecticut Republican, someone who's moderate on, which again means liberal, on social issues, and is a fiscal conservative. Jamie, time and time again, has worked across the aisle, had the lowest property taxes. Well, she was first select woman of Darien and did that with Democrats. So the other thing we're going to talk to Jamie about, and I talked to her about this a few months ago, was we're going to send 5 delegates to Washington, D.C., same 5 that were already there, by the way, and now they're all in the minority party. So no committees, going to have a tougher time getting, we're already the worst state in getting money back to Connecticut from the federal government. And I don't see that changing anytime soon now that the Republicans are in charge. So I think Connecticut sort of shot itself in the foot. Republicans now going on 20 years without any representation in Washington. If you're a Republican in Connecticut, you don't have a voice, and you haven't in a long time. I kind of want to ask her thoughts on just the future of the Republican Party in Connecticut and what they have to do to start becoming a viable second party in this state, because right now it's unfortunately not even close. And again, not like trying to pick sides here, but if the results of the election are clear from the get-go, what are we really doing? And so I think it's incumbent upon the Republicans to adjust the messaging and get on the same page as the rest of the state. Did you see
his announcement the other night?
Which one?
Did you watch the speech?
I did not, no, to be honest. I didn't.
It was shocking. He was not the normal boisterous Trump. He didn't attack anybody during his speech. You know how he's going on his anti-DeSantis freaking rant. Never attacked him, never talked about Mitch McConnell, talked about, trying to get the Republican Party back on track. What he said was very good. Not only did he say was good, but in the manner which he said it. Some would call it, if I dare, Joe,
Mm-hmm.
presidential.
Wow.
Yeah. That was
If
a
you're
Joe
gonna
Biden
if you're
knock, by
gonna
the way.
try this again, I think that's definitely
The right
the
tact.
approach you want to take. You're gonna have to attempt to be looked at as someone who can be a little more centrist and represent everybody. Otherwise, I can tell you right now, just based on the demographics, it would be extremely difficult for him to win, short of appealing to people in the middle. And I think right now he's put himself in a really tough spot.
Me too. Hey, Joe, I think we need to get to these headlines here. You want to
Yeah,
get to
let's
one?
get into some headlines. This is a hot one for us, by the way. Already on the state's radar for the dismal reading scores and being a day short in last year's school year, the City of New Haven School District was recently called in to discuss the district's absenteeism rate, which one school board member identified as being at, quote, crisis level. Last year, 58.1% of the city's 19,420 students were deemed chronically absent, meaning they missed 10% or more of the school year. It was called a record high for the district, the highest percentage listed statewide for 21-22. I told you about this earlier. We've talked to Dr. Amy Chai, and Michelle's pretty passionate about this as well. The test scores in New Haven for third grade are abysmal. 17%
Atrocious.
reading rate. The math rate's it's also in the teens. And $42 million in federal aid got pumped into that. And the kids still can't read. And that's a real problem. Between Bridgeport, Hartford, and New Haven, you're talking about 40% of all the students in Connecticut. And they're
They're
not
not
doing
showing
well.
up. They're not
They're
doing well. They're not showing up.
Well, so again, what do we got to do? We got to get these schools straightened out. Boy, this is a big percentage of Connecticut's future workforce. We can't have half of our student population
Not
unable
able to
to
read and
read.
write.
That is a huge problem right now. And, it's kind of incumbent on somebody like Rosa DeLauro to head back to Washington and maybe find some more money so that I think the other big issue is they need a little bit more targeted spending in New Haven because,
I'm like, is throwing money at the problem really the solution, Joe?
yeah, well, so
I don't
listen,
think so.
I'm not saying because look, I'm not a person that throws good money after bad. They spent $42 million. They spent a lot of it on the ventilation systems at the school. And the kids have to be able to breathe in order to read. I mean, that's essential, but they've got to do something because again, you could triple the test scores and you still would be under a 60%.
You'd still be failing score. You still have a failing score. Exactly. So why spend more money?
I talked to Lieutenant Governor Bysowitz about it, and she agreed like something's got to be done. They really got to take a look at New Haven, especially because, like I said, that's a pretty sizable chunk of students, and we're failing these kids, and that's wrong.
And it's from the top down. All right. Anytime you get on into a situation like whether it be education, corporate, anything, military, it always starts from the top. It's always the head of the snake. Right. So throwing money at the problem, in my opinion, is just a waste of money. We need to take a good look and figure out who's actually running this show into the ground, if I may. And that's, that would be money better spent than just throwing money teachers and saying they got to do a better job or whatever. But so, yeah, that's my 2 cents. Don't throw more money at the problem.
Again, if you're going to put money into it, there's got to be targeted programs with achievement goals so that you see if you're actually making some progress. But something's really got to be done because we are at crisis level, not only with the absenteeism, but combine that with the scores and it's a real situation. And again, you're going to start to lose these kids. They're not going to stay in school if they're not learning anything.
I'm wondering, you know what? I'm going to save this comment for the next headline. We're going to move on to the next headline, Joe. Cool. And I the same comment that I have for this next headline is going to apply for the previous headline. So here we go. In August, the state launched the Connecticut Premium Pay Program, which is also known as Hero Pay. Under the program, workers considered essential under CDC guidelines were expected to be eligible for up to $1,000 of Hero Pay. There was $30 million of funds authorized for the program from this year's state budget. On Wednesday, Comptroller-elect Sean Scanlon announced more residents than expected applied for the program. Scanlon said 206,383 residents applied. Through this process, it was determined that only 134,010 people were fully eligible. To be eligible, essential workers had to have worked between March 10th, 2020 and May 7th, 2022, and not be employed by a federal, state, municipal government agency. They also had to make less than $100,000. Others could be eligible for less money if they made more than $100,000. With only $30 million in funds, those eligible would only receive a little more than $200 instead of the $1,000 promised. The deadline to apply for the program was October 1st, 2022. Man, were these headlines 2 weeks ago? That's my comment. Where were these headlines 2 weeks ago? Tell me they didn't know they were going to run short. Tell me they just found out today that 206,000 people applied.
Well, this was a concern before the election, and yeah, the final audit, surprisingly shows up now, right after the election. Dr. Amy Chai and Dr. Leslie Denardis and Dr. Justin Giuliano, all in the 3rd District, did make a big deal about the test scores and about the problems in the New Haven schools. Rosa DeLauro would not debate those candidates and never came on the record to discuss that issue. And this is another embarrassment. Look, we've got a ton of money in the rainy day fund.
You know what? You're taking the words right out of my mouth.
I mean, let's go, Ned. Time to dip in and give these people the money that you promised them. Plain and simple. They were heroes then. They're heroes now. Let's stop the nonsense and pay the people.
I can't add anything more. I'll give you an applaud there, Joe.
I'll take that. Yeah.
Right? I don't think I've ever applauded you.
No, but I like it, and I'll try to do more. Yeah.
You know what, Joe? You're a liberal. You need to go. You and Dan need to go write a letter up to Ned Lamont and tell him he's acting like a conservative.
Oh my goodness!
Oh my God! He'll start swiping that pen quick.
Dude, Bob Stefanowski couldn't wait to spend all that money in the rainy day fund, and Ned's sitting on it. They've definitely got their roles reversed right now. So.
That's the party swap that we've all been talking about. There you go. Only in the state of Connecticut, though, and only for the gubernatorial race.
By the way, I reached out to Lieutenant Governor Bysowitz's office, and we were planning on having her on the show very soon. Don't have a date on that just yet. And some very sad news. I don't know if you saw today, but her brother was involved in a hit and run while riding his bike. So we'll give the Lieutenant Governor some time to deal with that. Very sad story. But just kind of wanted to put that out there. Meanwhile, Jimmy, a study conducted by moving experts, movingapp.com, looked at Google searches across the state on terms like houses in, Zillow, apartments in, and move to. Connecticut residents' most desired state to relocate to is New York. You might have thought it was one of those southern states. This is based on actual data. New York is obviously close to us, the different lifestyle, especially if you're talking about New York City. The average home price in New York State is $375,719, which is actually almost 2 percentage points lower than here in Connecticut. Massachusetts was the next desired state. Again, close. The average price in Mass, $611,189. That is the 5th highest in all of the U.S. And the more surprising one was the state of California was the 3rd most searched for state. The average house, $816,804. And obviously it's on the other side of the country. I was shocked not to see Florida and the Carolinas because I feel like a lot of people that I know that have left the state in the last couple of years, it's where everybody's been heading.
I think I searched the South Carolinas 865,000 times in the past couple of years. I don't know how that's possible. New York. Well, I mean,
I firmly expected that to be North Carolina, South Carolina,
absolutely.
Florida.
I mean, that's all the reports that we've got. I mean, even in the other study that came in that said 50,000 New Yorkers moved into Connecticut during the pandemic, right? We talked about that the other night on our show, actually, Divided We Stand, Thursday nights at 8. And then they're moving back to New York? Or Like
I don't know.
those
That's
average
bizarre.
house prices got to be coming from like the Finger Lakes area. There's no way you can go out to Suffolk County and get buy a house. You can't buy a garage for that much. I've lived there, and this was years ago. I can't imagine what it is now.
Yeah. No.
I don't. I'm gonna have to look at these numbers. I really am. I'm a tad bit skeptical, only because it's impossible to buy a house in Westchester County or below for $375,000. Impossible. I've lived there. I'm telling you. I've looked
I
at
understand.
houses.
It's average price. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, man. They're
I
taking
do. I
it.
will tell you this: the always skeptical Jimmy. We're going to take a quick break, and we will be back next on Connecticut Politics TV Live.
Want to have your show on CT Politics? If you produce a show on CT political issues or commentary and want to play it to the world, contact us now at ctpolitics.tv. We'd love to have you part of the team.
The former chairperson of a local Democrat party in Connecticut must serve 2 years probation and pay $535,000 or is that $35,000 fine for fraudulent submitting absentee applications and ballots for dozens of people without their knowledge during a local election. John Mazzoli, 72, the former chair of the Stamford Democrats, was found guilty in September of 14 counts of both second-degree forgery and making false statements in absentee balloting. It was a connection to the 2015 election of boards of finance, education, and representatives. Prosecutors said Mazzoli, who was sentenced on Monday, intentionally forged and submitted absentee ballot applications and packets containing election ballots in the names of nearly 3 dozen individuals. At the sentencing, Mazzoli apologized, saying, "I'm sorry that things happened. I take full responsibility." So I'm so happy you gave me this one because we were talking about this the other night, right? So voter fraud, voter integrity, election integrity, whatever you want to call it. Our Secretary of State-elect said that it's acceptable. It's acceptable. The candidate that ran for Secretary of State, which is in charge of the elections, said, no, zero tolerance, zero fraud is acceptable. I don't know how anybody else feels, but that's the way I feel, right? You always strive for perfection, knowing that it's unattainable, but it doesn't mean you accept it. Go. I don't know what more to say.
I understand what she was saying when she said that. Again, the idea that you're not going to have no election fraud at all. And again, it's not like we're not prosecuting people who get caught, because we certainly are. Again, you're talking about 36 votes. So not what you want to hear. It's definitely look, not an ideal situation, but again, for people who are worried about there being massive election fraud, that's the good news, is when it does happen, it generally doesn't it doesn't go unnoticed. 36, again, in the grand scheme of things, there was 2.2 million registered voters in the state. If we're talking about that low of a number, it could have been a lot worse. You look,
there's
again,
more common. That's just not in the headlines.
Yeah, look, and maybe, but again, my point is these things are being caught, and then people are being prosecuted, and so again, to me, if anybody's worried about how this system is working, you don't need to, because again, there's listen, Jimmy, I've heard a lot of people in the last week or so complain about the idea that, well, geez, American Idol can get us results in one night. We live in an era now where the demographics are so tight in so many places like it never was before, where, we could generally call a race by 8 p.m. And you knew by the time all the ballots poured in, it was going to be exactly what it was going to be. And we've lost the ability to do that. We've lost the ability to do that because so many of these elections come down to the wire. A lot of them triggered automatic recounts because they were so close. And so, again, if there is voter fraud, sometimes now, Jimmy, 36 votes could make a difference in some of these elections. So we need election integrity for sure. And I have no doubt that Stephanie Thomas plans on combating election fraud and folks like this who, and shame on John Malozzi there, because I mean, you're the leader of the party. Why is it worth it? Again, for 36 votes, is it worth damaging your reputation and the reputation of the local Democratic Party for 36 votes?
I don't want to get into this next. I don't want to really get too deep into this, Joe, but 2.9 million immigrants were caught at the border. 1 million of them weren't. That's a third that weren't, right?
Yep.
You see where I'm going with this?
Sure.
There's not just 36 votes. If that's the benchmark, I guess you can say, then there's dozens more elsewhere out, and they all tend to add up. I mean, how many votes did Logan lose by?
Sure. And I understand why people are concerned, right? And again, when these elections are as close as they are, as a matter of fact, they're doing a recount right now down in Greenwich, Duquesne, and Stamford, between Fazio and Crow. This thing, they were about 100 points different, 100 votes. And so it triggered an automatic recount. And here's the funny thing. For everybody who complains about the voting machines, a recount is done by hand. And so it takes time. And as I pointed out on social media on Monday, if you've never worked a poll and you don't know how the polling process works, close your mouth. There are Democrats and Republicans who sit together, challenge ballots together, and they work things out together to make sure that there is no election fraud, to make sure that we're not just throwing out one side's votes and not the other. So there's a lot of election integrity. And by questioning the whole process, I think we're doing a terrible disservice to many people who volunteer their time on election day. If you're so worried about election fraud, you're welcome to volunteer, and then you can be part of the process, and you'll see all of the training and all of the security that is put in place to ensure these things are as legit as humanly possible. To compare our elections to American Idol is idiotic. I've been in media for 25 years. If you think the American Idol votes really mattered, you're showing how clueless you are. Record companies had millions of dollars invested in those singers. You think they were leaving it up to America to choose? Really? What a joke. That is like an outrageously funny thing to say. I also heard, hey, Brazil was able to get their vote counted in one night. Yes, they already knew who was going to win 3 weeks before. That's how that was able to work. So I wouldn't compare what we're doing to other countries. Everybody wanted hand counts. Everybody wanted to make sure these things are fair. The 2020 election got a clean bill of health from the nonpartisan voter election committee. I think we're in pretty good shape here as far as elections. I was very excited that Dominic Rapini did not win. I think having an election denier as the Secretary of State would have been a terrible disservice to the citizens of Connecticut. I asked Mr. Rapini to come on and talk to me repeatedly, and he wouldn't do that because he didn't want to have to face the facts that he's an election denier.
If that's your biggest gripe about Dominic Rapini, then you should.
Dominic Rapini doesn't know what the job of Secretary of State is.
Let me tell you, if he was let's just say the so-called election denier, which I can't stand that term.
And for the record, he says he's an election skeptic, which now we're just discussing his degree of doubt. I'm not buying it.
Wouldn't that make him a stronger person to shore up elections? Because this was fake. I'm going to make sure that mine are 100% secure. I'm going to make sure that Connecticut is 100% secure.
It wasn't until
33%, that's fine.
Well, it's not
30%,
33%. It's nothing like that. It's like 0.03%.
I know I'm exaggerating.
Of course. And Dominic Rapini, until the week of the election, he finally admitted in the week up to the election that he doesn't believe there's massive voter fraud in Connecticut. I've got about a dozen postcards I received from him that would say otherwise. And so I found him to be a very dishonest candidate. Again, a guy who's a Trumper. And I don't think that sits well with people in Connecticut. That's a really important office. I also had suggested on multiple occasions, because again, as part of being Secretary of State, you're in charge of the businesses in Connecticut. And it's something I never heard Dominic Rapini mention. And so I had asked on the radio if Dominic Rapini even understood what the job entailed. And I'd like him to come on so we could talk about it. And again, despite multiple efforts to get him on, he wouldn't engage with me. And so
for Apple, dude, he knows business.
I'm not saying he's not a smart person.
You know what I'm saying?
I'm not saying he's not a smart person. I'm
not debating for Dominic Rapini right now.
You don't have to. Listen. Ethan Book, who was also a candidate, he challenged Jamie Stevenson in the primary. I've talked to Ethan Book extensively. He thinks Dominic Rapini's a great guy. I said, no doubt he's a great guy. I've talked to Dan Newmeyer, who I also asked to connect me with Dominic Rapini on, because listen, I try to be fair to everybody, Jimmy. If there's something about you that needs to be talked about, I need to talk to you about it. Otherwise, I'll make my own assumptions. If you don't deny there's massive election fraud until a week out, I've got real concerns about your candidacy. I gave him every opportunity to come on and clear the air, and he didn't want to do that.
Well, personally, on a personal note, Joe, before we get on to our last headline, I have to believe that our elections are fair and balanced. I have to. Like, personally, I have friends that have fought and died for the right to vote, to allow people the right to a vote. So, I mean, I can't go around thinking that our elections are rigged or anything like that in good conscience, knowing, because it just does a disservice to those people that have gone and sacrificed so much before me. So there we go. So I have to personally. So let's go ahead.
I agree with you. Listen, and I'm going to say this. Look, when there is election fraud, it seems like we catch it a lot and we prosecute people. And I think we need to continue to do that. You know, I'm not saying election fraud is okay. I don't mean to minimize. Yeah, I know. I don't mean to minimize, you know, what John Malozzi did. But again, it could have been on a much grander scale. And that's what a lot of people think is happening, that it's on a grand scale. And it's not. It's some clown forging, 36 ballots. In the grand scheme of things, he didn't tip the balance in that one. So again, it becomes kind of a foolish move on his part. And all it does is it further questions the credibility of the Democrats and of absentee ballots. So it's a double black eye here. I
just hope that we can move past this whole the big lie, right? I hope we can just soon, really, really soon, move past the conspiracy theories and get back down to just normal politics, right? Normal policies. We need to get back down to policies, procedures. We need to get away from rhetoric, get away from character. Character is it's more looked upon than your policies, which character doesn't affect your life. Policies do, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but that's just my take. We're going to have a Jamie Stevenson up after the break. Stick with us, guys.
CT Politics TV and the Connecticut Taxpayers Union present Unaffordable America with Daniel Kent Newmeyer, Joe Patrina's band Little House, focusing on Connecticut.
Now get yourself ready, go cat go. Ooh, yeah.
Entertaining and taking an educational look at nonpartisan issues of affordable living in America.
Born in a land where we wave 'em high.
All points of view are welcome.
And we got blue angels climbing in the sky. I'm I'm the luckiest guy in America. I'm the luckiest man born in America.
Join the Connecticut Taxpayers Union right now at ctpolitics.tv.
Born in America.
Welcome back to Connecticut Politics TV Live. Our guest is Jamie Stevenson, who faced off against Jim Hines on November 8th. She'd won the GOP primary with a resounding 90% of the vote from the district's 17 towns and cities. Jamie Stevenson previously served as a town at Darien's first selectman for 10 years, where she kept property taxes among the lowest in the state. Jamie also currently serves on the board of directors of LifeBridge Community Services, a community-based behavioral health in Bridgeport. She's also on the board of directors of Stamford Emergency Medical Services and is an active member of the Stamford Norwalk State Attorney's Community Engagement Board. Jamie, always a pleasure to talk to you. Welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me, Joe. It's great to be here this evening.
Now, Jamie, I mentioned, obviously, you faced off with Jim Hines, and you and I had talked a whole bunch leading up to this election, and I thought you were amongst the best candidates running in the entire state of Connecticut, a person who is, as nonpartisan as you can hope to have in a politician, someone who's looking to work across the party aisle. And I really admire you for your politics and for sort of being your own person, where the Republican Party has started to stray further and further to the right. You kind of stuck to your guns, and you're your own candidate, not necessarily following the party platform. Think that hurt or helped here?
I think it helped me a lot, to be honest, to talk with people across the district who have so many different thoughts and ideas, different needs, concerns that they have for their families, their businesses. People are really not looking for traditional politicians. And I heard, in the previous segment, I heard the word rhetoric. There sure is a lot of rhetoric out there. There was during my race. There were a lot of people on both sides of the aisle talking in a fearful way, fear-mongering and making people concerned, that I think had a great influence on the outcome of the race. But I want to focus on the positive about my race. I thought it was fantastic. I loved every minute of it. Talking with people across our 17 towns, spending a great amount of time in the city of Bridgeport, building new coalitions of people who really are looking for change. Unfortunately, there were things that were, outside of my own control that really led people down a path to not vote to make that change.
So I have heard from a lot of candidates that there was sort of a preference given to Democratic candidates over Republican candidates through all the different media outlets. You and I were fortunate to have spoken on numerous occasions, but I definitely heard from a lot of other candidates who I did talk to who said I was the only person that would talk to them. And I think it's such a great disservice to Connecticut. We're sending our 5 reps back to Washington, D.C. Come January, they'll be in the minority party, which means, again, bad news for Connecticut, which is already only getting 95 cents on the dollar that we send to Washington. We're one of, I think, the worst state, or the 49th state, as far as getting back governmental funds. So Jim Hines and the rest of the Connecticut congressional delegation isn't really bringing the bacon back home. And now they're all going to be sitting in the minority party, no committee assignments. When you and I talked, I said, gosh, you're such a good Connecticut Republican. If they're going to take back the House, boy, wouldn't it be great for Connecticut Republicans to have a voice in Congress and to be in the majority even?
It certainly would have. I always thought it was a bit crazy to elect the same people over and over and expect something different from them. But that's exactly what happened this past election cycle. I'm an optimist by my nature. I'm going to hold out hope that that our representatives in Washington are going to figure out a way to actually work across the aisle so that they can participate in our democracy. I'm certainly, leadership starts at the top. And unfortunately, we've seen with President Biden, he says it out loud that, he doesn't work with Republicans anymore. And that's a problem. And I think his party is following suit. So we have a bit of a chance to hit the reset button with some slight shifts. Certainly wasn't the red wave. Maybe it was a red trickle. But focusing on Connecticut, we have one party rule here in Connecticut, and I have always believed in political balance. It's how I've always done my work as first selectman, as chairman of our Council of Governments. We work across the aisle with our peers from other parties to get things done for the people we serve. And there seems to be a disconnect about that when it comes to the federal government. But I'm going to hold out hope. And if my race highlighted some issues for my opponent, people don't see him. They don't believe that he's here understanding their problems, their concerns, following through on projects, bringing funding home. If our campaign helped to illuminate some of those challenges and he takes that to heart, that will be a very good thing.
So let's talk about, obviously, Donald Trump, who I think has already made things problematic for Republicans in this state. Bob Stefanowski somehow did worse 4 years later and completely distanced from Donald Trump. Leora Levy really never ran much of a campaign. Obviously, also didn't even come close in her race with Blumenthal. What we did see was Connecticut got bluer somehow, which to me almost defies logic. The other really interesting thing was, if you looked at all of the polls leading up to this, people were very concerned about the economy. And that to me sort of spelled like, oh, this should be a lot closer if the economy really is people's top issue. And it seems like that kind of held true for the most part. So to me, the election results were kind of surprising.
I would certainly agree with you, but I'll go back to a comment that I made before. There was a lot of fear out on the campaign trail. People were very concerned about the direction of our country. People are very concerned about democracy and if democracy will stand. I heard that time and time again. And the Democrats, that was their constant drumbeat that, if you elect certain people, if you elect Republicans, all of these terrible things are going to happen. Also, we heard about the Supreme Court Dobbs decision. Women across the board, Democrats and Republicans alike, that issue played large in their minds about government in general taking away certain rights. So there was a lot of fear, and people clearly made the choice that staying with the same leadership was less risky than taking a chance on new people. I firmly believe that myself and many other Republicans that were running this cycle, we have the best ideas. We know how an economy works. We know how to bring down inflation without hurting families and businesses. But, there's just back to your point about the media, without an open and honest media across the board, it's hard to inform people. I've never seen an election cycle like this. And I want to thank you so much for having me on several times, because you were one of the few people that would open up to hearing from people like me. So many media outlets said they weren't going to run election information this year. They didn't run candidate profiles. My My debate was actually not open to the public, which was crazy. So, when you look at, if you want to talk about an assault on democracy, I think we need to talk about some of those things that are really undermining the public's ability to get in true factual information about candidates.
So in this election, I voted for Cynthia Jennings, the independent, for Secretary of State, because to me, putting a Democrat or a Republican in charge of the election seems like the worst idea on the planet. And it's obviously the way we've been doing things for a really long time in this state. The independents and the Green parties and all of those smaller parties in Connecticut had a real difficulty getting ballot access. And you mentioned it before. I mean, the Democrats have ruled here for a really long time, and they've got a real stranglehold on the elections. And Rosa DeLauro wouldn't even debate her opponents at all, which, again, I think it's such a disservice to your voters. And it almost has an air of like, this is my seat and I'm entitled to it. I like Rosa DeLauro. I don't have a problem with the Democrats in the state for the most part, but I do have an issue when it's almost a sense of entitlement, or again, like you said, the idea of, look, they tried to run this whole election on abortion, and it seemed right around September that the economy ended up really jumping front and center as inflation got higher, gas prices went up. People were generally concerned, as they should be. And so again, in this whole process, I am shocked at sort of the way this all worked out. I guess here's my other question. Let's go this route. I'm hoping to talk to Ben Proto in the next week or so, because I think the Democratic Party in Connecticut, number one, needs to start funding and supporting whoever is going to be nominated for governor and for the Senate races. I think having these random billionaires fund their own campaigns, I don't think it's doing anything for Connecticut. I think if Connecticut continues down the path of people like yourself being moderate Connecticut Republicans, I think the Republican Party needs a real rebranding in the state to distance itself from what I think has become a very toxic brand around the world even. Like, that's how bad the Republican Party looks worldwide. And I think it's unfortunate because there's a lot of great moderate Republican candidates who end up getting tossed aside because, like you said, of the fear that democracy is somehow on the line, which became their last second rallying cry.
That's very true. And, I had hoped, one of my goals of running for election for this congressional seat, along with the fact that I certainly was in it to win it, of course, but I wanted to show people what moderate republicanism looks like and how we can be different, how we can really be a big tent party. And so hopefully I was able to do that a little bit. But we do have to keep putting forward candidates that embody what we all know, what I know to be the kind of Republican that I am. I believe in smaller, less intrusive government. I believe in being fiscally conservative. I wholeheartedly embrace the idea that taxpayer dollars, those are not government dollars. That's our money. We've worked hard for that, and we are investing in our government. And I'm looking for leaders that understand that relationship. We've gotten so far away from those fundamentals that, I'm going to still continue to be that moderate Republican that cares about those core Republican values. And hopefully we can someday soon get past these more polarizing social issues so that we can get back to a better balance. It's so critical for our country. We're tearing each other apart, and I'm very concerned about that.
We're talking to Jamie Stevenson. Jamie, appreciate you being here. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back, and I want to talk about what's coming up in the next elections, especially with you. We'll do that next here on Connecticut Politics TV Live.
This is the home of the CT Strategist Report with Daniel Kent Newmeyer. Interviews with Connecticut's top leaders, expert political analysis, news, commentary. Gain the insider's perspective.
All right, we are back. We're talking to Jamie Stevenson. So Jamie, Jimmy and I were talking earlier today about the future of the Republican Party. In 4 years, there'll obviously be another race for governor. And right now, to me, there's really not anybody who jumps to mind amongst Connecticut's Republicans. Again, I'm a fan of yours. I'm very concerned again that in 4 years, who's the next billionaire that's going to show up and have to fund their own campaign. I really do hope that this Republican Party can sort of get it together. I think with moderates like you, I think they could do a better job of fundraising. So I hope you plan on staying with this, because again, I just think you are the exact kind of candidate that we need you in office somewhere. I think it's a shame that you're sitting on the sidelines. I look at somebody like Themis Claridis not even being in the selection, and I think, oh my goodness, like these are the Republicans we want. And I'm not sure that the party itself is doing enough to help you guys out.
Well, we do have to come together as a party. The most important thing after any situation like the campaign and election cycle we just had is to do an after action. We have to understand what worked well, what didn't work well, how we can work together. I feel great that here in my district, we did work as a team. We worked with the House and Senate candidates. Everybody was helping one another. I truly believe that's how it's supposed to work. You bring up a great issue, though, fundraising. Honestly, it's been very hard for Republicans to raise money. I hope we can figure out a path to that. Next cycle, serving in elected office at any level should never be only for those who can self-fund their campaigns. It really can't be that way. We do, for better or for worse, we have the CEP program here for statewide candidates, but there's nothing like that for federal candidates. And as you well know, incumbents keep their campaign committees open from cycle to cycle. They just keep accumulating money into their campaigns. So by the time they run for election, they have, like Senator Blumenthal and Jim Himes, millions and millions of special interest dollars that flow directly into their reelection campaigns. So, I certainly don't have an answer on that right now, but it makes it hard for anyone that's going to challenge, an incumbent. I look forward myself to also having conversations with Chairman Proto. I consider him to be a friend. I do think that he has everyone's best interest in our party at heart. And so hopefully the things that I can share with him about my experiences will help to carve a better, more positive path forward for the next election cycle.
I had sort of passed a message to him through a friend of mine, and he kind of scoffed at the idea of a rebranding, like that was the most unheard of thing. And my response was, it's 2022. I think rebranding is something that, it's on people's minds, this idea of, and I think, listen, here's what I find most interesting. I talked to Leora Levy quite a few times during the campaign as well. And she's a fantastic person. She's got great values, and I respect her a lot. And I brought up to her right off the bat, that I was concerned that her pro-life position would be not embraced at all in Connecticut. That idea of like, well, I did it and I had, and it's like, well, I understand you did it. And she's a Cuban immigrant and she's made a great life in America, and we should all be very proud of that. And I think my buddy Jimmy here can attest to, there's almost sort of that attitude of, we don't want to help people because we want people to, go through the horrible process that our ancestors all had to go through. And again, I just think that sort of stuff rubs people the wrong way. This to me seemed like an election where you didn't have to spin things. She talks about there being an open border. we have a terrible border crisis, but we don't have an open border policy with Mexico. We actually have one with Canada, which is how Paul Pelosi's attacker got here. So I felt like this was an election cycle where rather than spin and say things that Joe Biden cut oil production, that's not true. Why spin things unnecessarily when all you really had to do was like, look what these guys have done in the last 2 years. No spin even needed. I think if it would have been done that way, where there wasn't again, I think the Republican Party, for me especially, has a credibility issue. And again, I think that obviously trickles down to the moderates and all the good candidates, but a rebrand to me makes so much sense. Jimmy, I don't think you agree with that.
I really don't. I think the conservative party and the conservative values are what they are, and they're good. And we need to conserve.
I'm not saying I'm not suggesting at all that you change your values, but I think a more moderate approach to a state that's clearly extremely blue. Well, if you want to be competitive,
strategy,
like, listen, I am a very conservative person personally. Okay. And I think Jamie's a lot like this, where my values aren't going to be everybody else's values. And clearly the state has spoken, and they've spoken for about 40 years, that they don't value the values that we have. So I think you still stick to your values, but I think you just need a more moderate approach. Again, Lindsey Graham talking about a national abortion ban 3 weeks before the election. Wow. You know,
I was confused
in no way, shape, or form did that shake anyone's confidence that abortion rights weren't under attack. It sort of undermined what people like Jamie were saying. And again, I just think it hurt the entire party.
I really like Jamie's approach to politics and being the moderate. I actually agree so much more with her than any other Republican that I've heard this election cycle. I am a fiscal conservative. I'm more of a libertarian socially. I'm just do what you want to do. Just be happy. Just, you can't tell me not to do what I want to do either. All right. So Jamie, you've answered, I had 4 questions written down. You answered all of my questions when you were answering Joe's. And so I'm just going to tell you, I appreciate that you ran. I respect the fact that you ran, because I know that running is not an easy task. You got it, you're put through the gamut, and I really, really hope that you stay with it. I think the Republican Party needs more Jamie Stevensons. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jimmy. I really appreciate that. And, I'd like to reiterate that before I ever got into this race, I had to decide what success meant to me. Away from winning or losing, because I knew it was an uphill battle against a 14-year incumbent, and strong national headwinds. So what success means to me is exactly what I think we accomplished. We reached out to people who are looking for all the things that we've discussed here, and those people, the 40% of the people that voted for me, were not satisfied this past election, but they matter. We need to listen to them. We need to see them. We need to hear them. So, I can't tell you today what my plan is for the future, other than to spend time with my family this holiday season. But we have to stop in our political discourse. We have to stop forgetting about the people that disagree with us, and find a way to help more moderate candidates on both sides of the aisle get elected, so that we can actually work together and solve the real problems that we have in this country. And boy, do we have a lot. So, I look forward to seeing what happens in the coming months and over the next couple of years with our presidential nominees. And I'll be thinking long and hard about how I can contribute best, because, I enjoy serving. I think I have something to offer with my municipal background and regional background. So hopefully you'll have me on again another time, and we can talk more about that.
We look very much forward to it. Jamie, I really appreciate all your time leading up to the election. Thank you for coming on again. And I'm very proud of the campaign that you ran, and definitely look forward to having you back talking some more in the near future. Thank you so much for joining us, Jamie.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Jimmy.
Thanks.
Jamie Stevenson, one of my absolute favorite politicians in the state of Connecticut. I think we need more candidates like her. I think if the Republican Party really wants to compete in this state, I think you need to load up on people like Jamie Stevenson.
I'll be honest, Joe. I think you need to load up on Jamie Stevenson's nationally. I really
absolutely,
do. Not
absolutely.
just in Connecticut. I think if we had more moderate, right-leaning, of course. Don't get me wrong. I'm not abandoning anything. Right-leaning, but moderately right-leaning Republicans, I think it would go a lot further. I think the elections would be a lot closer. I think we'd be having recounts all over the place. So, yeah, I really do.
And to listen to what Jamie said, look, I think moderates on both sides. You know, we need people that are going to go to Washington, D.C. and not sink their feet in the sand and be like, I'm not negotiating with the other side. That is just it's not the way to go about politics. And like Jamie just said, we have a lot of problems in this country. And the only way we're ever going to solve them is if we can get both sides to sit down and work on comprehensive plans together. And until there's people like Jamie Stevenson in Congress, it's not going to happen.
You know, we just need the politicians on both sides now, and on both sides to start fighting for the people again and stop fighting each other. Really.
Well, this was a pretty fantastic show. I got to tell you, too, Jamie Stevenson has now 3 times in our many conversations joined me about as last minute as you could expect a congressional candidate and pretty high-profile politician. So big thank you to her, and also to Rowena White, who was her communications director, and who will also be joining us in the coming week or so to discuss the news media and its influence on these elections, which has been not a great one from what I've seen. I can tell you that.
How much time we got left, Joe?
We've got enough time for you to play your Jimmy. For anyone who doesn't know, Jimmy, in addition to being an amazing radio producer for the Gary Byron Show on WDRC-AM, he's also an actor. He goes to New York City a lot. Where were you, in North Carolina a few weeks ago filming? Yeah. Right? And so Dragon Eats Eagle is the name of the movie. Why don't you use that trailer? Actually, I think we have maybe just enough time to run it, and we'll end the show.
Okay. Play.
This is a story, an incredible story, pretty much a documentary about the most crooked people, very bad people who want to see me gone. But I'm not going anywhere.
Madam Evergreen, I thought we had a deal.
Everyone knows the fat man needs to go.
I need ideas. Go.
I think we can get more mileage out of the Russian spy connection.
Derivative. If releasing a tape where he talks about grabbing a woman's pussy just days before the election did not bring him down, we need something big.
What about a plague?
Wait a second. What about a plague?
Plague?
Yeah, well, however you want to define it. Flu, plague, what's the difference?
This is all a master plan. To use governmental parties and public health organizations to politicize a mass plague.
That's weird. Those Chinese government guys really love their money, huh? For a bunch of communists that are supposed to share with people.
Yeah, well, that's only on paper. They are the smartest businessmen in the world.
We have our next candidate for the upcoming presidential election. So, where is he? Oh. Ta-da!
He's still alive?
Oh, and the best part, the average life expectancy in the U.S. is 78. If someone gets, let's say, heart disease or cancer or hit by a bus and they die, if they're positive for our plague, we can mark them as such.
They're in the business of keeping the business broken.
Mr. President, what do you make of this?
I have one question. Does this tie go well with this jacket?
Dragon Eats Eagle. Where people can check that out on what? Amazon?
Amazon. Go out to Amazon Prime right now and buy it or rent it for $2.99, guys. It's a very, very funny movie. I promise you'll enjoy it.
All right. Well, make sure you check out Jimmy's movie and make sure you join us tomorrow night, 5:00 for Connecticut Politics TV Live. Good night.
Good night.
CT Politics. We're cutting out the political bull. Yeah, I guess that about sums it up. Join in the fight now. Go to ctpolitics.tv to join the Connecticut Taxpayers Union.